Imagine a time long ago, over 1,000 years before your grandparents were even born, in a land that would one day be called France. This land was a patchwork of kingdoms, and one of its most powerful leaders was a man named Charles. He wasn't a king, but he was the real power behind the throne of the Franks, a group of people living in Western Europe. Charles was known for being a brilliant and tough military leader. His strength in battle earned him a famous nickname, Martel, which means the hammer. He was the strong hand guiding his people, a man who knew how to command an army and win their absolute loyalty on the battlefield. This was a period of great change and conflict all across the world. Far to the south, a vast and powerful empire, the Umayyad Caliphate, was expanding. It stretched from the Middle East, across North Africa, and had even crossed the sea into modern-day Spain and Portugal. This empire was rich, well-organized, and had a formidable army that had conquered many lands. For years, its armies had been pushing further and further north, winning battle after battle. Their advance seemed unstoppable, and many of the Christian kingdoms of Europe watched their progress with growing fear, wondering if their own lands would be next. The Battle of Tours, which took place in the year 732, is one of those moments in history that stands out as incredibly important. Today is August 6, 2025, and looking back all those centuries, we can see this battle as a critical turning point. It was here, near the city of Tours in what is now central France, that Charles Martel and his Frankish army stood firm against the invading Umayyad forces. This wasn't just another small skirmish. It was a major confrontation that many historians believe helped decide the future direction of European culture, religion, and power for centuries to come. Why does this one battle matter so much? It represented a clash between two completely different worlds, two major religions, and two powerful military forces. The outcome would have huge consequences. If Charles and the Franks had lost, the history of France and perhaps all of Western Europe might have been very different. The story of the hammer and his stand at Tours is a dramatic tale of strategy, courage, and a fight for the future of a continent. It's a key event that helped to shape the Europe we know today, setting the stage for future kingdoms and empires. On one side of the battlefield stood the Franks, led by the formidable Charles Martel. The Franks were a Germanic people who had settled in the Roman province of Gaul centuries earlier, creating a powerful kingdom. Their army was not like the professional, uniformed armies we see today. Instead, it was mostly made up of infantry tough foot soldiers who were loyal to their leader. These men were experienced warriors, hardened by years of fighting in local conflicts. They wore thick leather or chainmail armor and carried heavy wooden shields. Their main weapons were swords, spears, and their famous throwing axe, the Francisca. Facing them was the invading army of the Umayyad Caliphate, under the command of Abd al-Rahman al-Ghafiqi, the governor of Al-Andalus, the name for Muslim-ruled Spain. This was a very different kind of fighting force. The Umayyad army was known for its skilled and swift cavalry. These horsemen were lightly armored, which allowed them to move quickly across the battlefield, launching devastating charges with their lances and curved swords called scimitars. They were a confident and battle-tested army, having already conquered the Iberian Peninsula and raided deep into Frankish territory, gathering immense wealth along the way. The two armies represented not just different military styles, but also different cultures and religions. The Franks were Christians, and their society was a mix of old Germanic traditions and the remnants of the Roman Empire. They were fighting to defend their homes, their faith, and their way of life from what they saw as a foreign invasion. Their world was one of castles, lords, and a deep connection to their land. The idea of a unified Christian Europe was only just beginning to form, and this threat helped to strengthen that identity among the different kingdoms. The Umayyad Caliphate, on the other hand, was one of the world's great Islamic empires. It was a center of science, mathematics, and culture, with magnificent cities like Damascus and Cordoba. For them, expanding their territory was part of their imperial and religious mission. The raid into the land of the Franks was intended to continue their successful campaigns, to capture more territory, and importantly, to seize the legendary wealth of the Abbey of St. Martin in Tours. They saw the Franks as just another kingdom to be defeated on their path of expansion. Before the main battle, the Umayyad army had been sweeping through the south of the Frankish lands. They had defeated a major army led by Duke Odo of Aquitaine and had sacked the wealthy city of Bordeaux. Loaded with treasure and spoils from their campaign, they continued their march north toward Tours. It was during this advance that Charles Martel was called upon for help. He took his time, gathering a large and disciplined force of his best Frankish warriors. He knew he couldn't beat the Umayyad cavalry in an open field, so he carefully chose the ground for the battle. Charles marched his army south and positioned them on a high, wooded hill between the cities of Tours and Poitiers. This was a brilliant strategic move. The trees would disrupt and slow down any cavalry charge, forcing the Umayyad horsemen to fight uphill and in cramped conditions. By choosing this defensive position, Charles took away his enemy's greatest advantage. For about 7 days, the two armies faced each other, waiting. It was a tense standoff in the cold October weather. The Umayyads, used to quick raids and decisive battles, were hesitant to attack such a strong, well-prepared defensive formation. This waiting game was a battle of nerves. Charles's men were well-disciplined and used to the colder climate. They stood in a tight shield-to-shield formation known as a phalanx, like a solid wall of men. Fun fact: Frankish soldiers were known for their incredible discipline, and Charles had trained them to hold their ground no matter what. This patience was a key part of his plan. He wanted to frustrate the enemy, hoping they would make a mistake. Abd al-Rahman, the Umayyad commander, knew that waiting too long was risky, as winter was approaching and his army needed supplies. Finally, on the 7th day, Abd al-Rahman ordered the attack. The Umayyad cavalry charged again and again against the Frankish square. The Franks held their ground like what one chronicler called a wall of ice. They used their shields to block the attacks and their spears and swords to push back the horsemen. The battle raged for hours with fierce fighting all along the line. The Frankish infantry proved to be incredibly resilient, absorbing the shock of the charges and refusing to break their formation. Charles Martel himself was in the thick of the fight, rallying his men and inspiring them with his courage. The turning point of the battle came from a clever rumor. Charles had sent scouts to raid the Umayyad camp at the rear of the battlefield, where all the captured treasure was being held. When word spread among the Umayyad soldiers that their camp was being looted, many of them broke off from the main attack and raced back to protect their wealth. This caused chaos and confusion in their ranks. Abd al-Rahman, the commander, tried to rally his men and restore order, but in the confusion, he was surrounded by Frankish soldiers and killed. The loss of their leader shattered the morale of the Umayyad army. As night fell, the fighting stopped. The Franks remained in their formation, expecting the battle to continue the next day. But when dawn broke, they discovered that the Umayyad army had retreated during the night, leaving their tents and some of their treasure behind. They had abandoned the campaign and were heading back south towards Spain. Charles Martel had won a decisive victory. He didn't pursue the retreating army, choosing instead to secure his victory and consolidate his power. His nickname, the Hammer, seemed more fitting than ever after he had smashed the invading force. The Battle of Tours was incredibly important for the future of Europe. It halted the northward expansion of the Umayyad Caliphate from the Iberian Peninsula into the heart of Western Europe. While it wasn't the single event that saved Christendom, it was a critical moment that boosted the confidence and power of the Franks. The victory greatly enhanced Charles Martel's prestige. He became the undisputed hero of the Franks and the defender of their faith. This victory laid the foundation for his family, the Carolingians, to eventually take the throne and build a vast empire under his famous grandson, Charlemagne. Today we remember the Battle of Tours as a pivotal moment in history. It helped to ensure that Europe would develop as a largely Christian continent, dominated by Frankish and later European powers. The battle became a legendary story, a symbol of European resistance and identity. While historians debate its exact significance, there is no doubt that the actions of Charles the Hammer Martel on that cold October day in 732 had a profound and lasting impact, shaping the political and cultural map of Europe for the next 1,000 years and beyond.